Throughout the history of my channel, I've covered a lot of the major objections to Christianity, but I thought it might be useful to summarize them and put them all in one place. My goal here is going to be to put on my teacher hat and give you the lay of the land, so this video should be useful to both skeptics and Christians alike. Also note that this is going to be comprehensive in that it covers a lot of ground, not that I'm going to cover each and every topic in depth, though I will link resources in the description for those who want to go deeper. An obvious initial worry is whether God exists in the first place. It's highly questionable whether there are any successful arguments for theism, or if we even need a God to explain anything. It seems plausible that non-theistic worldviews like naturalism can explain everything theistic worldviews can explain, with the added benefit of shaving off something unnecessary from our ontology. In addition to that, it can be persuasively argued that there are many lines of evidence that fit better with worldviews that do not include an all-knowing, all-powerful, perfectly good being, such as divine hiddenness, the existence of horrific suffering, etc. On to the resurrection then. When considering whether or not someone rose from the dead, hopefully we can all admit that on the face of it, this is a pretty wild claim. An extraordinary claim, if you will. I assume that for basically everyone watching this, you wouldn't say you've seen the laws of nature being violated. Every second of your life is a testament to the fact that nature is regular. Plus, you've probably had hit or miss experiences with human testimony in general, and may even correctly see that religious testimony specifically is especially problematic. When weighing all that, hopefully you come to the conclusion that we would need some very strong evidence to overcome the initial implausibility of believing that someone came back to life, and that minimal facts just won't cut it. Unfortunately for the Christian, it doesn't look like there is. All we have is one uncontested first-hand eyewitness to a risen Jesus. One. And it's Paul. According to the scholarly consensus, the Gospels were written by non-eyewitnesses decades after the events they purport to describe. The immediate context is damning too. The Ascension story appears to presuppose false ancient beliefs about a three-storied universe, a clue that we're not talking about literal history if there ever was one. Not to mention all those demons running around causing sickness and killing pigs, but I digress. Additionally, the historical Jesus was an apocalyptic prophet, and looks to have mistakenly predicted the end of the world within a very short time frame, making him a false prophet, according to Deuteronomy 18. This appears to be confirmed based on how various New Testament authors viewed the timeline. They certainly speak as if they understand it in the way that I'm describing. Paul declares to those alive at the time that salvation is near and the day is at hand, as God will soon crush Satan under your feet. It's better not to marry because the appointed time has grown very short, and those who have wives are to live as though they had none, because the present form of this world is passing away. The end of the ages has come upon churches Paul is writing to, and thus Christians are encouraged to let their reasonableness be known to everyone, since the Lord is at hand. Paul speaks as though the people he's writing to will be alive for the resurrection, and encourages them to persevere because their suffering will be relieved when Jesus comes in judgment. Additionally, the rich are warned that they have laid up treasure in the last days and have fattened their hearts in a day of slaughter. Later authors even seem aware of the failed expectations, because, you know, a day to the Lord is as 1,000 years. But it's actually not surprising for movements to rationalize failed expectations. It happens all the time. Here's just one example.
Let's look at the Millerites and their response to the Great Disappointment of 1844. The Millerites were a group of Protestant Christians that emerged from the religious fervor of the Second Great Awakening with a shared conviction that Jesus must be returning very soon. Their leader, a Baptist preacher named William Miller, came to the conclusion from reading the book of Daniel that the second coming would occur sometime in 1843 or 1844. And as Miller and his followers searched the scriptures, they eventually homed in on the precise day of Jesus' return. The Lord would descend from heaven and set up his eternal kingdom on October 22nd, 1844. But of course, October 22nd came and went, and to quote the scoffers of 2 Peter 3, all things continued as they have since the beginning of creation. For many Millerites, the apparent non-event of October 22nd had the eventual and paradoxical effect of actually strengthening their commitment to the core beliefs of the movement.
Moving on. Deuteronomy 13 teaches that the main way to tell if someone is from God is to look at whether or not their teaching conforms to what has already been received, generally speaking, not whether they can perform signs and wonders. Let's just say that I don't think it's at all obvious that the teachings of Christianity represent the clear fulfillment of Judaism, and that alone is a good reason to doubt it. This is even more apparent when we look at all the amazing prophecies that supposedly point to Jesus in the Old Testament, or at how the New Testament authors use the Old Testament more generally. They weren't trying to respect the original context of these writings, rather they were using them for their own ends like everyone else in the Second Temple period. But let's zoom out for a bit. What about the Bible as a whole? Every version of Christianity that I'm aware of claims that the Bible is divinely inspired in one way or another. The gist is that God is ultimately behind the biblical texts, but there are a lot of reasons to be suspicious of that. The most foundational stories either didn't happen or didn't happen as depicted in the text, including alleged events with tremendous theological significance like the Exodus and Conquest narratives. We also find a lot of moral absurdities, including instances of divine deception, Yahweh granting the Israelites legal permission to buy foreign slaves to keep for life, the depiction of his genocidal commands to wipe out particular people groups, etc. There's also conflicting details in theology, and an all-around confusing atmosphere of claims that invite the reader to get creative in order to smooth over the discrepancies. Finally, many of the essential doctrines of Christianity seem to make little to no sense, particularly the Trinity and Incarnation. I mean, there's a reason why Muslims are like, what the are you talking about when presented these ideas? To clarify, this isn't a defense of Islam, but more a point about how people who aren't socialized into a Christian culture view these things from the outside. And that's just it. I think the reason people have such a high tolerance for these ideas in certain places has more to do with the demographics of faith where they live rather than the plausibility of the ideas. So that's that. Hopefully this has been a helpful overview of reasons to be skeptical of Christianity. There is one quibble you might have had if you're a Christian watching this, though. I did dare to insinuate that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Tap this video next to me to see why.